Good morning, Tube for you. It's a little past Memorial Day, and I've did another vlog about my mom's dad, and I'd like to do one about my dad's dad now. We'll call him Grandpa Dean. And Grandpa Dean, he was in World War II and Korea. And you know, the guys of those era, the people who were in that war, most of them felt guilty for surviving, and they didn't ever talk about, you know, what happened to them, and you kind of had to push and prod and get them to talk to you. And so I don't know hardly anything about my Grandpa Dean's experiences in World War II and Korea. I do know that he barely made it out of Korea with his life. There was a lot of pain and suffering and different things that are just awful, you know, you can read about. And I've never heard my Grandpa Dean talk one time about any of those experiences. So I'm not going to really dwell on that part with my Grandpa Dean, because I don't really know that much, which is okay. I just want to thank him and everybody else for serving and making my life here in the States possible. But one of the things that I need to tell you, my childhood memories of my Grandpa Dean, we actually lived fairly close to them when from like when I was 6 to 14. And I loved going over to their house when I was younger, and my Grandpa Dean would always play cars with us. And they had this like plastic basket that they got when they lived overseas, and it was full of these cars and trucks and army vehicles and stuff that were all made out of metal, and they were heavy, you know, nice, old, really cool. And I believe they were my dad's toys when he was young, and they just, you know, always held on to them so we could play with them when we got older, and they were so cool. There was one that was like this truck that had this flatbed and this tank that we could drive up on top of the flatbed, and you know, it was just awesome. But anyway, Grandpa Dean always made time to play with us. You know, it didn't matter how long you wanted to play, he would always be there, right there with you, whatever you wanted to do. Down there on the floor, running the cars around, or putting puzzles together, or whatever the case may be, he always was there with you, whatever you wanted him to do. And it was more apparent to me, you know, I always had memories of him doing that, but I never really understood the depths of his patience until I had kids of my own, and we were up visiting them, and he was doing the same thing with his great-grandchildren. And I'm thinking to myself, man, it's been like an hour and Grandpa's still on the floor playing with my kid, you know? So it's just awesome to see that. But anyway, Grandpa Dean always was meek and mild and humble. And you know, one of my favorite sayings is that a humble person doesn't think less of themselves, they just think of themselves less. And that is my Grandpa Dean to the max. I mean, that should be put on his headstone. We would drive up, my wife and I would drive up to see them, and it was a good 4 or 5 hour drive, and we'd always go the back roads, and so we'd end up going through a whole lot of like mosquitoes and bugs all over the place, and we'd drive at their house and our windshield would be just plastered with bugs. And we'd usually arrive at night, you know, and so, you know, I always say, oh, I gotta clean that windshield, because and you'd always have those streaky smear marks, you know, from the windshield wipers and everything, and the bug guts. But whenever we got up in the morning, it didn't matter how early we got up to whatever we were going to be doing the next day, that windshield was always perfectly clean. And, you know, everybody knew it was Grandpa Dean that cleaned it off, but he never said anything. He never came out and said, you know, got that windshield for you. You know, he never did that. He was always just real quiet about it. Just, you know, you're just grateful. So anyway, I want you to have this picture of my Grandpa Dean, you know, meek, mild, humble, just awesome guy who does what his wife asks him to do all the time, and, you know, never heard him talk back, never heard him complain about anything. I was in my teen years, and I'm riding with Grandpa Dean, and he had this old black pickup truck, this Chevy pickup truck, this from the 60s. It's got to be like 68 or something, because it had a wooden bed in it. Okay, black truck, stick shift, V8, two-wheel drive, and I'm going with Grandpa Dean. Remember, meek, mild, humble guy. And we go to get fuel, and that truck always had a camper on it. Whenever he and Grandma would like to go camping, and they had this truck with this camper on it. Another story is when I was younger, my friend Kyle and I were coming back from someplace, and we were riding in that camper, and we had sardines. And we ate sardines until we about puked, and that camper smelled like sardines for years, I think, because of that instance. I don't think I ever ate another sardine after that, but anyway, we had taken the camper off. And so this truck that had a camper on it for decades is now without this camper. And I remember I'm riding with Grandpa, and he's like, wow, this has got a lot, you know, it's got all its power back in it. And Grandpa never talked much. He's always real quiet. So we go and we get fuel, and he fills up the tank, and then we're coming out, and we're getting ready, and there's a gap. You know, there's cars coming this way, cars coming this way, and there's this gap where, you know, you have to shoot the gap to make it, or you have to wait. Well, Grandpa, and I'm thinking, Grandpa's not going to shoot this gap. He's just going to wait. Next thing I know, he pops the clutch. And we scoot out into the street. Whoa, you know. And I'm thinking to myself, something's wrong. Something's wrong with Grandpa. Because he's not that type of mentality. He's so calm, mild-mannered. And I look over at him, and he's calm as can be. And he looks over at me and goes, that was fun. And that just floored me. You know, I never saw that side of my granddad. You know. So anyway, I heard this story. You know, he lived in this small town, and when you live in a small town of just hundreds of people out west, you know, there's like tons of miles in between. It's not like Tennessee where there's a house every mile or so. You know, you have a population of people here, and then there's tons of space, miles and hundreds of miles, and then there's another population of people. So anyway, then I hear about this story long ago where, I don't know if it was before he was married, or I'm not sure if it was after the war, before the war, I'm not sure. Anyway, he had this car, and I need to, before I post this, I'm going to call him and ask him what it was. It was probably a Lincoln with a flat-headed V8 or something, I don't know. Some kind of car from the 30s, I think. And he would take this car, and I guess he was a bit of a hot rodder, and I didn't know this. And he would take this car and soup it up and do different mods to it and whatnot, and then he would go to visit his friends or his girlfriends or whatever, and then he would just scream in between these towns. Remember, we've got some population of people, and like nothing in between for hundreds of miles, or 50s or 60s of miles, you know, long distances. So he would, I guess he's coming home and he's flying. He's just going as fast as he could go. There's a turtle in the road, but he's flying, and a cop sees him. And of course, this is small town USA, so everybody knows, oh, that's Grandpa Dean. And they know his car, and they know who he is, but they can't catch him. So he's flying by, he sees the cop, sees the lights, or hears the siren, or whatever the case may be back in the 40s or 50s, you know, back in the 30s or 40s. And he just floors it. He screams home, He gets home, he gets in the garage, and he's got such a lead on the cops that he takes the rear tires off of his car, you know, jacks it up, takes the rear tires off of his car, and he goes and gets in the shower. And then the cops show up at his house, and they're like, we know we saw this, you know, Grandpa D, we know we saw him. And then, you know, whoever's at his house is like, well, he's in the shower and his car's in the garage. And so they go look in the garage, and sure enough, you know, the car's jacked up, the tires are off of it. And so they didn't have any evidence. They're like, well, he's been working on his car the whole time. So, you know, that story about my granddad, I love it. I mean, I wish I could have hung out with him in that era. You know, that's maybe where I get my desire for speed a little bit, I guess. But anyway, that's Grandpa D. Just fun story about that. I wish I could hear more about stuff like that. But meek, mild, humble man, patience of Job, always doing, you know, what he's supposed to and asked to by everyone around him. And just an amazing man, and you would never know it. But for his whole life, I told you, you know, he had pretty close brushes with death in the war in Korea, from what I know, from what I've heard. I don't know the details. I just know that he was lucky to get out of there with his life. But all I know is my granddad never complained about it, and that's the important part. It's not necessarily what happened to him and why, you know, who so did what to him, but he never complained about that, and that says a lot about a man. To have bad things done to you and yet not retaliate or hold grudges or, you know, do other things that a lot of people do nowadays. I mean, sometimes I know people hold grudges for years over something that was said, let alone something that was done. And again, he felt unlucky, or he felt like he was lucky, but he felt like he doesn't deserve any credit or heroism. You know, the people who died and the people who were buried overseas, my Grandpa Ralph said the same thing. You know, those were the heroes. And the best they could do to honor them is to live right and do what they're supposed to do, you know. And so anyway, we're back. My brain's bouncing. Back on track.